Hey, welcome to what we're calling, at least short term, the Old Guy blog. In fact, if you want to contact us, send an email to oldguysblog@aspengrovenetwork.com, and we'll try to answer your questions, or we'll take your ideas for future talks, or even better, give us a better name than the Old Guy
Amen.
blog. I mean, it's just what we're living with. And this is the very first one. And since we're in the month of January, we're going to start today by talking about stuff that we would say to start or stop. And what is it like to start or stop things in the church, in our personal lives? And why is that hard? Why is it good? So as we get started, I'm going to go to my friend Bill Ankerberg, and we'll kind of introduce ourselves as we go to talk about starting and stopping, and particularly about the challenge of stopping.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Bill Ankerberg. I've been a pastor for 52 years now, and I'm glad to be with my friends here because they say that only 7% of the people who started ministry end in ministry, and the four of us are still going through God's grace, and so we thank God for that. This was like an article that appeared in the well, you can't see it, in the Santa Barbara paper that my niece wrote, and she's an expert on productivity and helps companies develop this. And she's been written up in Forbes and several big magazines and stuff. And she said, the start of the year is not just a time for resolutions of what we add, but it should also be a time for what we decide to, in essence, get rid of or downsize. And in my background in church, uh, the hardest discussions we had were when we would go through a strat ops or something and we talk about strength, then we come to weaknesses. And we knew there were some things that were not working well and we were not doing them well, but we didn't know how to get rid of them. We didn't know how to stop them because there were people from the church involved in leadership, people from the church involved in different levels of it. And so I think one of the things to think about this time of year, uh, as we come into this new year, is spring cleaning is coming up. And what are some things that we should stop doing? When I was in my 40s, the mentality was a full service church where we try to just kind of meet every need. But then we saw that the churches that were really growing fast and strong were called simple churches. And they would just have a very, like, come to worship, join a small group, and get involved in service. That's all they did. And they didn't have a lot of the programs that the old churches had, and yet the churches were growing exponentially. So I think it's a good time for all of us to think about that. Have you guys had experience with that? Is this a good time of year to think about, how to maybe offload some things?
Steve, what's your experience been with stopping and starting stuff?
Well, first, let me tell you a story about a friend of mine who's a pastor in Charlotte. He's since retired, but we were talking, and he said that he took his wife up to New York City and went to a deli and was handed a menu that was gigantic. And so he asked the waitress to come over and said, "What's good here?" And she said, "Oh, it's all good." So he and his wife ordered, and when it came, it was average or below average. And then they started to talk, and they said, "I think that's our church." At this time, their church had about 3,000 people in it, and they just really felt like the Lord was speaking to them about becoming more simple. And about 1,000 people left after the leadership made the decision. And it was pretty much what you were talking about, Bill, in terms of the simplicity. We want you to come to worship. We want you to be in a group. We want you to serve somewhere. There were a couple of other little things, but they had gone down from 250 ministries down to a handful. And by 5 years, they had more than gained back the people they lost. They were running 6,000 people. And so it is a real painful thing when somebody has invested in a ministry that doesn't necessarily define the church. And we've had to do that too. And I'm a softie. I don't ever want to say no to anybody.
Mhm.
And so it can be very painful, but just think about the menu that the church is receiving from that deli. And if it's all going to taste average, then you probably aren't going to be moving ahead.
Steve, didn't you used to say something about how repeating the status quo, if it's not working, is the riskiest position to take? Do you
I
remember?
think probably somebody smarter, but thank you for attributing that.
I'm pretty sure it came from you. Hey, John, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think one of the things that we have often a problem with, I mean, ministries often are linked to persons and personalities, aren't they? And people have their passion for something. Something that is hard at times is actually to dare to evaluate, like, is it is fruitful? Is this actually giving us
Mhm.
the fruit that it's intended to have? That doesn't mean that we always have to see that. I mean, if God really has spoken, then being faithful and continuing something might actually release that fruit. Maybe in not in the time that we wanted it, but when the time is ripe for that. So sometimes we have to continue even when we don't see the fruit, but then we have to know. And I think this is really the challenge that I have faced. That people are there have bought in so much with their lives and with their energy that they have a hard time letting go. Um, Actually, it's interesting because just a few weeks ago I sent a mail to a number of people, and I talked about it's not only to look forward for this year, what might be waiting for us, but also we have to burn bridges to make sure we don't go back and to make it impossible for us to go back to things that we should not do. And that is also connected to this whole idea, I think.
That's kind of like Steve's
Yeah.
story, kind of decisively saying you're going to end something. I I think of my job in ministry or as a pastor as creating a spiritual environment, like a greenhouse where people will flourish. And sometimes what I find is I need to encourage people to do what they believe they should do, even if it's not big, even if it doesn't influence everything, but let them minister, but not necessarily let it become a ministry. It's not saying no to ministering. It's saying, nope, we're not going to continue that as a ministry that somehow influences everybody. But it's painful, isn't it? And it's hard.
Yeah.
And, in John 15, we know the words, Jesus said, I'm the true grapevine. My father's the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do not bear fruit so that they'll produce even more. So, one of the things in God's kingdom is pruning is always a growth strategy. And I think it's good to think about it this time of year because churches normally operate on a ministry year starting in September, kind of ending in May. But this is the time for mid-course corrections, beginning to look ahead to how do we wrap things up and how do we have good endings on some things that maybe we need to close out.
Right.
It's really a good word. And a lot of times if you teach something, like teach that from John 15 to set the stage then for acting
Yeah.
on it, because then you're anchoring it in scripture and as a principle of what God is about. Hey, guys, how about personally? Is something personally that you've stopped? Um, Either stopped worrying about or stopped acting on? Any examples around that?
See what I mean? It's hard to get rid of things.
Um,
uh,
I think that when I stopped being a pastor of a church, and I'm now out in Los Angeles and moved here because my son is a pastor out here, and he and his bride took our grandkids with them, and so that was a very
that was the
important
bait.
for us. But I think that rearranged our whole life. And I think that I had to go through a sequence of um, preparing what my new future looked like and bringing into it important things that I want to engage in. Not so much with the mechanics of a church, but just personally. A couple of years ago, I was just really trying to get involved and reading a lot of books, and so I read 50 books that year, and was just a real enjoyable time. Then this past year, we've been serving people all across the country that we know and love that have gone through really difficult times, death of a loved one or a family that is in distress, and it has brought us great joy. I didn't know what going into 2025 was going to be. And now we have this massive wildfire that still isn't completely in control in Los Angeles. And what I think God wants me to start is to find a way of playing a significant part of helping those who are hurting that I otherwise would not ever meet. And
Mm.
so, um, it's such an important question because I have a blank slate, which I hadn't have since I was born, I don't think. And to try to find out where I'm able to just express the love of Christ. And so that's what I think my future is going to be this year.
When you say that,
Paul, you made some big changes in the last year too. Like I know you have. Go ahead.
oh yeah, I I was the lead pastor of our network of churches, and I handed that off to one of our pastors, and then I handed off the main site that I lead, Woodridge Church, this last September. So for the first time in 50 years, I have bosses, and I was told the other day by by the boss of the network, who also happens to be my son, that I'm a problem employee. And I said, I'm proud of that. Proud that I can be your problem. You used to be my problem. But
Could you explain what kind of problems you cause? That would be interesting.
I go, boss. I was just doing what I know you would want me to do, boss. I spent this money because I knew you would like it, like this to get accomplished. And he's
Just
ready to
what he did 10 years ago.
pull his hair out. When Steve was talking, I was thinking, the Apostle Paul was having all the success starting churches. He had an ambition to go to Spain, and
Yeah.
the Lord puts him in prison. But if he wasn't in prison, he wouldn't have taken the time to write the letters that really
Right.
become the content of the Bible. So oftentimes when God stops something, it's so that he can give birth to something new. Um, John, you're kind of in an interesting season because of the diagnosis you got. If you could tell people about that. And then you've started a reflection on your 50 years. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was like October 2024 that I was diagnosed with pancreas cancer, stage 4, that was untreatable. And just they said, like, in principle, they said, well, if you need painkillers, or if if you don't feel well, then contact us and we give you the pills, so you can die in a worthy manner. That really was the message. My
Because
son-in-law is
you're in Sweden, if people don't know.
yeah,
You're in Stockholm, Sweden.
Stockholm, Sweden. Yes. So that was a little bit what it was. But my son-in-law, he's a biomedical doctor, and in Germany, in Berlin, and so we decided to work with him and to work with supplements, especially, and diet and stuff like that, and drops and shots that I have and that I take and get. But for us, it's like also like, okay, what does this mean? And my desire is to continue really to see what God has till the last moments. And so actually there was an expansion after my diagnosis of ministry to the Ukraine. I'm preaching regularly online to a church when their pastor is not available, or when he's at the front lines, as he is a chaplain. ministry among taxi drivers that drive with the apps. And most of those are Muslims, Muslim friends. And I made many friends, and I helped to organize actually all the drivers and create an alternative where they're better paid and not being treated as slaves. And at the same time, also thinking about, okay, Lord, is there anything else? And I've been waiting. I've been active in the local church, but also like, is there anything more? And started to actually think like, is there anyone who wants to learn from the experience I have, both the deep valleys and the pits, as well as the mountaintop experiences? And that has been quite a journey. And Paul, you have been especially also encouraging me in that particular part. So, and I see, I'm so happy to feel that God has, God is extending. He is giving time. I
Amen.
should have died 10 months ago. That's what the doctors gave me.
John, you said 24 you were diagnosed. It was 23
Oh,
that you found
23,
out
yeah.
you had.
Sorry,
Yeah,
yes,
so
23. Yeah, thank you so much. My accountant would also have to tell me that I'm not so good in that.
I just want to say, you were given 6 months and that was like a year and a half ago. So God
Yeah,
is good. Yeah.
We're
yeah, and I
praying the
enjoy it.
prayer of Hezekiah. If you
Amen.
watching this, pray that for John, that John will
Add
have
years
more
to his
years.
life.
And what's the title of the leadership videos you're doing?
It is it's like what I've learned in 50 years of ministry, and it is like a discipleship and leadership course at the same time. So there's new saved people, and there's elders and pastors are part of that same course, which is quite interesting.
If you search it on YouTube, you can find that. Well,
Yeah.
anybody something you're starting, Bill or Steve, something. Steve was telling us some things he's being prompted to start. Bill, anything that you're looking at
Well, I'm
starting?
working now on trying to raise funding through Converge for our people and churches that were impacted in Los Angeles County in the fires. So I'm spending time working on that right now. And then on the backside of that, spending that money in strategic ways. So that's exciting.
My
We've had over $120,000 come in already just in the first 5 days.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think my favorite thing in life is doing evangelism and uh, just meeting someone, sharing an authentic relationship, and then trying to bring up the gospel. And I do it most days, especially if I'm in line at a grocery store or something. I just find a way of doing that. But I'm thinking of all of these. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say hundreds of thousands of people, Bill, do you think, that have been disjointed?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And and I just want to put myself somewhere where people who have no more hope. There's a bit of a facade, I think, in Los Angeles with these big houses and all of the great cars and everything else. And that is a big part of what burned down in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
It wasn't Compton and some of the poor areas, which I'm very grateful for. I don't want anybody to lose, but I want to find a way where um, God would just allow me to have fun telling people about how they can have hope again.
Well,
And Paul, we're all working on this new podcast now, thanks to you. So thanks for your leadership.
Well, thank you. I'm going to wrap this one up. We're going to aim for about 20 minutes. My advice to you would be stop worrying so much about what you do and start investing in friendships. Friendships
Mhm.
last long after what you do. And if you
Yeah.
have a question, comment, or idea for us to talk about, Old Guys blog at aspengrovenetwork.com. If you have an issue that you'd like one of the four of us to uh, correspond with you, I think we would be glad to take some of those and uh, and feel free to leave your prayer requests. Well, everybody, thanks for listening to number one. Get
Thanks
us
for
a better
watching.
name. Bye now.